Hi, I'm Gabby. Welcome back to another episode of the Happier Life Project podcast, brought to you by the free, award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. Today, we're delving into a subject that affects every single one of us: money. But this isn't just about numbers or budgets. It's about our habits, behaviours, emotions, and the stories we tell ourselves around our finances. The ripple effects with money are profound. Financial difficulties drive stress, anxiety, and isolation. Many feel trapped by the stigma around debt, making it harder to ask for help. And when essentials like heating or food are sacrificed, or when creditors act highly insensitively, the toll on mental health is huge. And even if we do have a bit of what I call fun money, maybe we overspend or spend to boost our self-esteem or make us feel less lonely. To help us navigate this complex and crucial topic, I'm thrilled to welcome Vicky Reynal, a renowned financial psychotherapist and author of the award-winning book, Money on Your Mind: The Psychology Behind Your Financial Habits. Based in London, Vicky runs a psychotherapy clinic dedicated to helping clients untangle the complex emotions behind their financial behaviours. From debt and overspending to money secrets, conflicts, or being too scared to spend, Vicky has seen and heard it all. In this episode, Vicky talks about how our self-worth and past experiences shape our spending, saving, and investing patterns. And she offers some practical strategies to reduce financial stress. We'll also look at how to avoid the sneaky marketing trappings that make us think something is in short supply. And actually, when you think about it, do we really need it? And if we are compulsive, trigger-happy online shoppers, how can we scratch that itch a different way? Vicky will also talk about why money can feel so emotionally charged and how we can create healthier, more empowering financial habits. Whether you're looking to break free from a scarcity mindset, develop a better relationship with money, or simply understand why finances can feel so overwhelming, this conversation is packed with actionable insights. And to our US listeners, Vicky's book, Money on Your Mind, will be available on January 7th, but you can pre-order it now through your favourite book retailers. Let's dive in and discover how understanding the psychology behind our financial habits can bring us one step closer to a happier, healthier life. Let's get started. Welcome, Vicky Reynal, to the Happier Life Project podcast.
Thank you.
I am fascinated by the subject matter that is your speciality that we're going to cover today. And that's exploring money and mental health and the psychology behind our spending behaviours. I'm curious on how your journey into this particular area began. Very highly qualified as a psychotherapist, but then specifically with money. Is it true you're the first financial psychotherapist in the UK?
Well, I'm the first person who's called myself that. But I have to say, I think all therapists will have dealt with money in the therapy room at one point in time or another.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I became quite passionate about kind of honing in on it and focusing on it for two reasons. There's kind of the personal connection, which always fuels somebody's passion in a topic. And so, my family had its own complicated relationship with money. And I brought that to my personal therapy. And I benefited so much trying to explore with my therapist about, what did it mean? Why did people treat it differently? Why did we react so strongly to it? And, trying to unpack the meaning of money in my family was really helpful to me. And so I wanted to give that experience to other people. I guess the professional interest is because between my psychology degrees, I also have a master's in business. And during the MBA, you do take classes that include the psychology of money in it to a certain extent. So there's behavioral finance that explores more broadly how, as humans, we might have certain cognitive biases that will skew what we do with money, our rationality around money. But I thought, well, as a psychotherapist, we have the perfect tools to help people unpack the meaning of anything in their lives. Why aren't we applying those tools to helping people understand what money represents in their lives? So it kind of all came together into this interest.
Why do you think so many people struggle with their financial situation?
Well, money is part of living a life. So we all have a relationship with money. We save, we spend, we buy gifts, we tip, we come across it all the time. And what I talk about in the book and what I've seen in my practice is that people use money in a symbolic way sometimes to express how they're feeling. And I think there's a lot of parallels when it comes to our relationship with food and our relationship with money. You see, if you think about it, we're not used to thinking about money as a symbol so much. But if you think about food, how sometimes, there's emotional eating, there's kind of a withholding when we're feeling kind of undeserving. We've been able to think about it in those terms, but we haven't really applied that same thinking to money yet. I see it all the time, people spending emotionally or not allowing themselves to have the good things that money can buy, or acting out all sorts of feelings towards other people.
Well, I think it's worth us noting a big cause of trouble with mental health is if people have a lack of money and life is very hard. So I'm sure there's the kind of, as I'm going to ask you about, emotionally loaded attitude towards money, or money being emotionally loaded for different reasons other than maybe not having enough. But then there is a big majority, I'm sure, of people even listening to this podcast that might be like, I do worry about money a lot. It is on my mind a lot. And that's because I don't feel like I have enough of it. Whether that's because they perhaps overspend or they buy into what they think they should wear and own and the house they should live in. That's a kind of another topic of conversation, I guess. But life can be really, really tough if you don't have enough money.
Absolutely. It's so linked to our survival in a very real way, not just symbolically. And, let's be clear, I see people, most of my clients can afford therapy, and some of them I see on a concession fee, but even that they can afford. And there's a lot of people who can't. There's a 20%, I think it is, the poverty rate in the UK. So there's a lot of people who struggle with the realities of a lack of money, of having to choose between necessities. And that takes people to a really dark place in their minds if those anxieties aren't appropriately managed. And, sometimes it comes down to really mourning the losses of what we can't have, what we can't give our children, what we can't give our families. Other times, what helps is not catastrophizing, which is something that when we are very anxious, it is easy to do, to think of worst case scenarios.
Yes.
Have enough, we'll be living under a bridge, and, and if this, if that, if the other. And so trying to be careful that we don't do that we don't only think about, the worst possible scenarios.
Yeah.
But also trying to keep our focus on what we can do. Maybe we can save more on this and spend less on that, rather than focusing on what isn't within our control, the state of the economy, the cost of living crisis.
Mm.
And so there's a lot of things, being careful about what we read. Are we reading things that fuel our anxieties and, put on paper our worst fears? Or are we reading things that actually inform us and help us make better decisions because they give us some useful, tips on budgeting or whatever it is? So I think there's still a lot that we can be mindful of and do to manage the realities of not having enough money.
Going back to the phrase emotionally loaded, which is what you describe money can be, could you go into that a little bit and explain how emotions like guilt and shame and even pride can affect our spending habits?
In many different ways. And maybe it's helpful if I give an example of each. So if you think about guilt, there's parents who maybe can't be present enough, or they feel they are not present enough for their children. Other commitments take them away, and they complement that by giving financially, or maybe giving, expensive gifts. And that's a choice driven by guilt. If you think about shame, I have so often seen a kind of a deep-seated sense of inadequacy or not feeling good enough driving our spending. So, we buy clothes that make us feel more desirable. We might buy gifts that make us feel more loved and lovable. So that's how shame can come into our spending. And pride too. Sometimes I've seen businessmen or women throwing more and more money into a failing venture because it is difficult to admit that it's not going to work out. And so that's their pride getting in their way of, stepping back and seeing the reality of the situation and finding a way to move on from it.
Yeah. Many people experience anxiety around money, like we've kind of touched upon. So these financial fears arise. They're not always linked to a lack of money, are they? They could be more deep rooted than that. Yeah, financial anxiety seems to be a word that I'm a bit more familiar with, I guess, because a lot of people have it.
Yes. And depending what statistics you read, some say that it's more than half of the population that suffers from financial anxiety. We can think of it as just being worried and stressed about our financial situation based on the realities of it or not. But in my experience, there are deeper reasons why we might be anxious about money. It could be an aspect of our personality. It could be that we're the kind of person in general who focuses on the lack, on what we don't have, rather than what we have. And we do that with money, but we do it with a lot of other things in life. It could be our body shape, it could be our intellectual qualities. We're always focused on what we don't know rather than what we know. Other times it could be rooted into a deeper kind of sense of shame, and which is kind of linked. We don't feel good enough, and so we watch everybody else. Maybe we're even envious of what everybody else has, and so it's kind of anxiety, but mixed up with greed. And so we want more, and we never have enough. And so the worry is not just around not having enough, but also, I always ask, enough for what? It's not enough to feel lovable or to feel secure, but in an emotional way, that will be wanted, will be cared for. And so it's worth exploring what the anxiety is about, because sometimes we kind of slap the term on it and dismiss it. But I think kind of exploring what the fear is by asking ourselves, and then what? What if you don't have enough money? What will be the price you have to pay? What will that lead to? And also, where is it coming from? Because you see, I've seen people who are anxious about their financial situation because their worst fear is that they will turn out like their parents. And maybe it comes from having watched the parents not be particularly good with money, maybe failing in business. And so that's their fear, that they will find out that they're like their parents. And so in that case, it's not so much about a scarcity mindset or focusing on the lack. It's about managing that fear by telling yourself, well, I'm already doing something different from my parents, and maybe I can watch not to make those mistakes again. And, let's focus on what is within my control to do things differently.
Yeah, it's really interesting, speaking to a lot of guests over the past 3 years about mental health subjects. Childhood comes up a lot, and how we've been brought up and how we've been influenced. But I guess I would never have put it with money before reading your book, certainly. But it makes all the sense, because when we're kids, we're learning, aren't we? We're picking up what we're seeing by the adults in front of us. And why should money behaviours be no different? But then I suppose if they're not the healthiest behaviours, then there's that kind of conflict that will arise when we get older and we do start having to make these decisions for ourselves.
That's right. And one of the key points that I make in the book is that it's not just about what we saw our parents do with money. It's not just about the lessons learned at home related to how to manage money or what we watch them do. There's a lot of emotional experiences that have an impact on what we do with money later in life. And that come from childhood. So, for example, how deserving do we feel of good things? How do we think the world will respond to us? What's our sense of agency? How do we set up relationships? All of these things are established quite early in our lives in relation to our caregivers. And they will have an impact on what we do with money later on, even if they have nothing to do with money. So to give you an example, if you don't feel deserving of good things, then you might end up sabotaging your finances because you feel a strange kind of sense of guilt anytime you have money. Or if you don't have a strong sense of agency, maybe because your parents never really paid attention to you, they kept shooing you out of the room, they never looked at the drawing you brought up to them, then where are you going to get that confidence to walk into a client presentation and pitch your idea with confidence, or walk into your boss's office and ask for a promotion? You carry a script inside of you that says, people don't pay attention to you, they don't respond well to you. And so that will get in the way of your ability to ask for more money or, invoice a client even. I think exploring how all these early experiences are behind the scenes getting in the way of our relationship with money now, I think is worthwhile.
Yeah, self-worth is something that comes up a lot. And when we do questionnaires or polls, it's always top that's what people struggle with the most or a lot. And I suppose if we don't feel like we deserve nice things, then also, like, even if we have the money, maybe we don't spend it on ourselves. Is there much of a difference then between being, say, a super saver and a hoarder?
A super saver and a hoarder. Well, the distinction I make in the book is more about greed and underspending. And what I mean by them is that greed is more kind of an insatiable desire for more money. So no matter how much you earn, you still feel you need more. You never get that sense of security. And so you might overwork, you might, have two jobs going on at the same time. It's about kind of accumulating wealth because it's never filling up that hole internally that you're trying to fill up with it. Underspending is more about an inability to give yourself the good things that money can buy. And so you become, I use the term financial anorexic to kind of give an idea of the behavior, because it is a kind of withholding, a self-denial. I'm not allowing myself to have the good things that money can buy. And psychologically, there is a difference. They tend to come from different places.
Mm.
Sometimes you see kind of that kind of self-denial coming from a place of not feeling deserving or trying to control something. So, for
Mm.
example, if you're afraid of parts of you that can really be out of control, then you might go completely the other way and become really controlling. And so the idea is that if you let yourself go a little bit with the spending, then you'd end up in debt in 5 minutes. You'd just spend it all and not be able to manage it.
Mm.
And so I think it's worth thinking of the two as different because they might come from different emotional places.
Financial self-sabotage, like overspending or procrastinating on bills, it feels unintentional, but is rather destructive.
Mm-hmm.
So, why are we engaging in these behaviors? Because I'm certainly guilty of it as well with the bill thing. And how do we break the cycle?
Mm. There's different sources to this behavior. People sabotage in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes it's what they don't do that is sabotaging, not opening the bills they receive, not settling debts, and so on.
Mm.
Other times they're quite active in maybe overspending to an extent that leads to serious financial issues.
Mm.
And I've seen it be a result of fear, for example.
Mm.
So you see sometimes adult children who end up, never taking off financially. They always kind of end up in one financial mess after the other.
Yeah.
And actually, when you start exploring that, behind it, there's a fear of being independent. What will it mean to leave the family home? Will they miss the family too much? Do they have what it takes to survive on their own? They're afraid of autonomy and what that means. And so, unpicking that, exploring that
Mm.
helps them see what they're doing for
Mm.
what it is. In other cases, it can come from a sense of guilt or even shame. You see, I've worked with people who have had experiences of neglect or even abuse as children. And what children do with those experiences sometimes is they blame themselves. There's studies that show that the children that grow up in abusive environments are more likely to describe themselves as evil. And so even if you grow up and as an adult, it wasn't your fault, you still might inside you carry an emotional imprint that says that you're kind of deserving of punishment at some level. And so you act that out through money. You don't allow yourself to ever succeed. You end up from one financial mess to the next.
Mm.
But there's less, let's say, severe cases than that. Sometimes it's just success anxiety, as I call it. So what will happen if you're financially successful? I've seen some women, for example, who are worried about what it will do to their marriage if they earn more than their husbands.
Mm.
Will they be seen as less feminine? Will they see their husband as less masculine? Which may seem like outdated ideas, but if that's the model that you carry from your childhood, where maybe dad was the main breadwinner and mother was at home looking after the children and the household, then you might feel uncomfortable to do something differently. As humans, we go towards what's familiar. And so you might end up sabotaging yourself simply by not asking for a raise that you deserve or not, putting up your prices in your, freelance business because, there's a small part of you that is worried, what will that do to your relationship? So
Mm.
you see it can be guilt, shame, it can be success anxiety, fear, and
Yeah.
sometimes just simply you're doing it to spite somebody, and I see this in adolescents, but kind of adult adolescents, let's say, who might still have a very, let's say, actively angry relationship with the parents. And so, they imagine that the parents want them to succeed financially. And so they sabotage
Oh, right.
Unconsciously on purpose, if that can be said. There's a part of them that is
Yeah.
acting something out, acting an anger out.
Well, something I did want to ask you as well was about the use of money to be, should we say, emotionally manipulative.
Mm.
So, as I mean, I guess another big topic in the book too, we're not now maybe looking at our finances, but those loved ones around us that use it as a way to, let's talk about Christmas coming up as a really super easy
Yeah.
example. In my family, the caregivers have always really gone overboard with the kids, but now we're all grown up. It still happens, but I've spoken to my siblings. I'm one of four, and we feel the pressure to match, but we don't necessarily have the funds to match the same level of generosity, and that doesn't make us feel good. We're getting more open about talking about it now, but it's even to a point because I work away a lot. It's deterred me from wanting to go home if my finances have been low because I'm thinking I can't really afford to buy everybody nice presents, you know?
There's this pressure around Christmas
Mm.
and what the presents mean. And
Yeah.
that's what I would invite people to be thoughtful about, because sometimes, we might be doing something in our minds that's very different from what other people are doing in their minds. And so we might be seeing our, cheaper gift as a sign of our inadequacy, of a sign of, how we didn't do as well as, other siblings financially. And so, it's hooking into our sense of shame. The person on the other side might just be grateful that you thought of something, so thoughtful to give to
Mm.
them, and might be seeing it as an expression of love and affection, and having a very different experience, attributing a very different meaning to the gift than you are. And I think sometimes we get really caught up in, let's say, attaching a lot of symbolic value to the price tag of
Yeah.
gifts.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas it's kind of missing the point, really, because, and there's a chapter in the book around generosity. And what is fascinating to me are all the different things that it can mean. And of course, we always think about generosity in its healthiest form, which is, I am expressing a good, positive feeling to somebody through my generosity, and hopefully they're receiving it with warmth and affection, and an equally positive feeling is evoked in them.
Mm.
But actually, we can mean all sorts of different things through gifts. And being careful of what we're doing is important, because, as you say, you could be missing out on Christmas altogether just because you've unconsciously decided that the amount of money spent on the gift will be representative of something
Mm.
important to you.
Yeah. The worry would be it looks like I don't appreciate you or love you as much as I do because
Mm.
I'm not showing that through the present exchange, which absolutely is ludicrous. But then this is why your book's so great because it does make you think about these things.
Well, and so somebody with that struggle, I would invite to think, well, if you feel you can't spend as much money on the present this year, but you still have, all this excess emotion that you want to show and express, then how can you do that without money? What's the alternative? Maybe
Mm.
the gift will be, we'll have more time and energy invested in it this year. It'll be a scrapbook or, a photo album, which can still very much show and
Mm.
express those feelings
Yeah.
without necessarily it being financial. Or maybe it's how you write the card that comes with it, maybe acknowledging that you would have liked to spend more. However, the sentiment is there. I think the impact will be the same.
Mm.
But you've also given yourself the experience of acknowledge those feelings of that it was falling short of what you wanted to really express through the gift.
Yeah.
And I was going to add something. You mentioned manipulation
Yes.
in your question, and I think that's there's some funny anecdotes in the book around that, how we can use gifts to manipulate people, like, the wife that buys the t-shirt wearing husband a collared shirt for Christmas every time. Is that a subtle way of saying, I'd like you to be more like this? Or, so I think that we need to be careful when we are buying a present that maybe imposes something of what we want the other person to be, rather
Yeah.
than really thinking about what they would like and enjoy. And, I think it's always worth asking what feeling will this gift elicit in the other person? Will it help them feel
Yeah.
seen, understood, loved, or will it make them feel inadequate or attacked in some way?
Mm. I feel really uncomfortable around money lending and both sides of the coin as well, where, if I needed to ask somebody, if I were like mum, if I could borrow some money.
Hmm.
But on the other side as well, when I've lent money to people and then they they just don't pay me back or think, they think, oh, she's going to forget about it kind of thing. And I'm bringing this up because I would imagine that so many people have struggles with that as well. Because I hate asking for money. And if I was going to borrow money off anybody for any reason, as soon as I had it, I would return it. But
Mm.
not everybody has that mindset.
Mm. Yes, and it's common. It's common for relationships to fall out because of money, and often lending is the trigger. Before we move on to why people might not pay you back, I think it's I always invite people to think, how are you complicit in a dynamic? And sometimes we are complicit when we don't make it clear that it was, we were just lending and not giving. And it could be because, maybe we're a people pleaser, and sometimes we don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. And so, we leave things out of the conversation when we're lending,
Mm.
and that has negative consequences. So I think it's always worth thinking about, well, what did I do here that enabled this to some extent?
Mm.
But let's say that, you've made it very clear that you were just lending money and the other person is not paying you back. Well, it's an uncomfortable conversation to have,
Mm.
but I think there's all sorts of different emotions that could be getting acted out. Is the other person maybe envious of how much you have and not paying you back is one way in which they're depleting you, all the extra money, but it could be also, other things that they envy about you that could be getting acted out here. I wouldn't suggest you call them out on that. The conversation needs to be about, I'm uncomfortable maybe bringing this up, but I'm aware that you're still owing me that money and I don't want any resentment in our relationship. I care about the relationship. And I was wondering if we could maybe think about putting
Yeah.
together a plan for you to pay me back or something like that. Always being mindful that the other person might not be doing it intentionally, and there could be, a real struggle behind why they aren't paying you back. There could be shame around their inability to pay you back and what that would do to the friendship. So I would always invite people to be cautious and tentative
Mm.
when they first bring it up, but also, it's assertive in wanting the money back
Yeah.
because of what it would do to the relationship if it wasn't talked about and it was.
Yeah, it's so complicated, isn't it? When it's with, I feel like it's like the people that you may be like close to that it's actually harder to ask. But I would imagine a lot of people, if they had the money to give it freely and they knew the other person was struggling, then they probably would if that was somebody close to them. But then you've always got those sneaky ones, I think,
Mhm.
that just try and get out of it.
Yeah. But I think it's hardest with the people close to us because we care about their relationship. And so it's, what will
Yeah.
this debt do? What does it mean? And sometimes it's there to keep a distance between two people, that could be what's getting acted out. And I think trying to explore that, at least in your own mind. Why are they keeping this in between us at this moment in time? What's going on in the relationship
Mm.
in a more broader sense that could be
Yeah. There's
getting
more than meets
expressed
the
here?
eye. Yeah. I have to ask you about spending compulsions and shopping addiction and retail traps and all of that stuff, because I think it's becoming actually a huge problem now. And I guess part of it is clever marketing strategies that make you fear that well, it's the FOMO, isn't it? It's the fear of missing out. I learned a new phrase recently, which is JOMO and ROMO, which is the joy of missing out and the relief of missing out. So I'm wondering if we could apply that to the money side of things as well. I think flight companies do quite a good job of being like 2 seats left. Because anytime I'm booking a flight and I visit family, a few times a year, so I have to, and then I'm always like, there always seems to be 2 seats left whenever I pay for any flight,
That's right. There's a shop on my street that has been closing down for the past 5 years now.
Yeah, right.
And so sometimes, it does help to try and see scarcity for the marketing strategy that it is, and
Mm.
maybe we can mourn the loss of this one T-shirt that might still be there in any
Yeah.
way. Next time we look. It is hard because we live in a world in which shops are in our hand now 24 hours a day. They never close. And so there's never what there used to be, which is that time to think before we make a purchase. It's effortless and always available. And so how can we counter those forces? Can we build in time to think? And so, I have clients who are helped by just adding things to the basket, but not, telling themselves that they can't purchase it until the end of the week if they still really, really want it. And that
Yeah.
usually that thinking time already knocks a few items out of the basket
Right.
by the
Yeah.
end of the week. Can you avoid temptations? So unsubscribing to newsletters and all those things, apps, deleting some apps from the phone can help people not be so tempted by them. Creating boundaries and sticking to them, which for some people means a budget,
Mm.
concrete budget on what they can spend every month. These are all there's many more kind of strategies that you can use to limit it. But ultimately, I think trying to understand what it is that you're trying to do with your spending,
Mm.
I think is more helpful.
Right. Because it's
Yeah,
not always about what we're buying, is it? That's what, again, a really good point in the book was about it's the thrill of the purchase versus what it actually is.
exactly. So it could be, when is it that you overspend? And for some people, it's on Sundays, Sunday afternoon, they're on their phone at home alone. Okay. And what are you feeling then? Well,
Mm.
that's when I feel most lonely. It's on a Sunday. Okay. And how else could you deal with your loneliness if not, being on these shopping websites? Well, maybe I could call a friend or I could, And
Mm.
so if you identify what it is that you're trying to address through the spending, then that will make it, much easier to manage it and maybe find a different way to address the feeling, which sometimes can be just boredom, really. And
Yeah.
so, is it boredom? Is it a depressed feeling that you're trying to numb through the spending? What can you do about that? Is it time, I don't know, to speak to a friend about what you're going through, or to start therapy, whatever it is? I think trying to identify the root cause of why you're doing what you're doing with that spending is helpful.
Yeah. Because if you do get sucked into the compulsions to spend to fill any kind of void, then it usually is followed up with guilt, isn't it? If you're overspending.
That's right.
Mm.
Because then you're not just left with the same feelings that you were probably trying to address through the spending, but on top of it, you have the guilt and regret of having spent too much, and now you're also worrying about having gone over budget and what that means, and why are you so bad with finances, and
Yeah.
it can make you spiral further, really.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like any other addiction, right? Like if you are addicted to food or to alcohol or to smoking or, these things that we know are not good for us, but we don't really seek professional help, I suppose, in the same way for doing it with shopping.
Yes, and it can be equally damaging, because a lot of people overspend to the point where they build a lot of debt, and that can definitely take people to a very helpless place. And, one of the saddest things is that people don't seek help about their debt early enough for it to be managed. And so it can very quickly spiral into a situation that is financially really serious, but also have a very serious impact on mental health. And so trying to address it early, when you're feeling that, sometimes it is just emotional shopping, retail therapy, and it
Mm.
isn't things that you necessarily want, need, or even ever going to use, then it's worth asking yourself those questions.
And just being mindful of being sucked into the marketing ploys,
Yes.
especially on social media.
Yes.
It's like buy this now, last one, or some influencers advertising something, and yeah.
Yeah, I think it's always about what we think the item will get us. Will it make us fit in more with our group of friends? Will it make us feel more confident? Will it make us feel more likable? And then, it arrives and it usually underdelivers in
Mm.
terms of what we were hoping it was going to do emotionally. It ends up being yet another dress, not,
Yeah.
the one thing that was going to make us feel
Yeah, like $1 million.
exactly.
Yeah, don't get sucked in. What do you see in your clients that is something that you recommend that is helpful when it comes to not necessarily managing our finances, but maybe feeling better about them? Or maybe it's the both. Maybe by managing them more, we would feel better about them.
Hmm. I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit. There's a lot of things that we could do better, starting with talking about it. We don't talk enough about money. It's still
Mm.
very much a taboo for many people. I think that the younger generations are starting to be more vocal about their desire for financial literacy and their, the trends like loud budgeting and things like that are good signs of people.
What's loud budgeting?
It's basically it's a new trend of people being very openly vocal about not being able to afford something. I'm on a budget this month, so I won't, join into this dinner. And it became a trend because, it feels like a bold thing to do when it comes to money because it's such a taboo. It wouldn't have been a trend
Mm.
if we had just normalized talking about money. If it was just normal to tell your friends that, do you mind, guys? I'm just going to do a main course today because I'm on a strict budget. Or,
Yeah, that's the worst when it's like, should we just split the bill evenly? And it's like,
hmm.
yes, well, you had, 3 glasses of expensive wine alongside your 3 course.
Exactly. And then people feel
Yeah, we've all been
resentful and
there.
taken
Yeah.
advantage of. Yeah. So, I think normalizing talking about money with
Mm.
family, friends, partners, I think is helpful because a lot of time we carry shame about our relationship with money. Most people I speak to feel they should be better, even non clients. They should be better than they are with money,
Mm.
and everybody else is more controlled or organized or whatever it is. So I think finding out that we're not the only ones that have doubts or gaps in knowledge, I think is good to do.
Mm.
The second thing is to learn. A lot of times people are anxious about money because they are afraid of what they don't know, what they don't understand. And studies have shown that the more financially literate you are, the more that decreases your financial anxiety.
Wow,
So,
really?
yeah, so there are resources, reliable resources out there that people can use and educate themselves. And maybe that's the third thing that I see so much in people is what I call, the vagueness defense,
Yeah.
which is we keep some financial matters, we procrastinate, we avoid them, and we
Mm.
keep them vague. And that's really unhelpful because actually, if we try to, whatever it is, it might be the debt on our credit card that we're not opening up, and we're anxious about it, we're afraid of it, but actually making that step of opening up, looking at it, confronting it, facing it is the first step to actually being able to do something about it. But even when it comes to our own self-criticism, like, oh, I'm bad with money. And I'm like, okay, that's a bit vague. What do you mean by that? Well, with investments, I just don't understand. I don't know what an ISA is and pensions. Okay, so it's ISAs and pensions that you don't understand. Yeah, I don't know what they are. And I'm like, okay, well, where could you learn more about them? And you see, as you make it more and more concrete, an avenue opens up to what you could do about it so that you'd feel less anxious and less bad with money about it.
Ah. What
So,
about, I suppose, like when it comes to paying the bills, and if you don't have enough and you want to ask if you could do a payment plan? I feel like some people on the other side of the phone are not the kindest. And, getting these threatening letters through the post and stuff like that for people that don't have much in terms of fun money, should we say? Just sometimes life happens and we can really take it to heart, can't we? And it can make us feel like a failure and it can make us feel terrible. And it's bad enough we can't pay the bills, but it's like how we've been treated when we've tried to get on top of it or to try and put things in place. Have you got any advice for anyone that might be in that kind of situation?
well, in short, my advice would be if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
And it's such a mixed bag, which is unfortunate. But, for all the stories that I've heard of people feeling judged by the person on the other side of the phone, there are that many stories too of people being surprised by what they found on
Mm.
the other side of the phone. I have had clients whose debt was forgiven when they explained to the bank that they were struggling with a particular addiction. There's people
Wow.
who, yeah, so there's people who have had, some fines forgiven by the tax authorities when they explained how the situation came about. And, I'm not saying that we can get out of our responsibilities and get free rides. But what I'm saying is that you're not always going to find somebody judgmental on the other side of the phone. And if you're ready to confront the situation and show a willingness to own up to maybe, what you could have done better, you might find somebody understanding on the other side, but you won't know unless you
Mm.
try.
Let's try. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I guess we should start wrapping things up. I can't let you go without us doing the Happier Life Project's last 5 in 5, which is the same 5 questions that I ask every guest to conclude the episode. When and where are you at your happiest?
I would say in moments of real deep connection with another human being. And
Mm.
that's something that fortunately I can get in my work as well, and not just in my personal life.
What's your favorite thing to do that nourishes your mental health?
Well, there's two: reading and exercising. I think reading broadens the mind and can really sometimes make you feel understood and help you see things differently. And
Mhm.
exercise is a must for everyone.
What piece of advice do you now know that you wished somebody would have told you earlier that would have made you a happier person?
It's a piece of advice I heard in my 20s. It was actually Warren Buffett who gave me the
Oh.
advice. I had a chance to meet him as part of a a school trip at the time. And he said to me, it was a point in my life in which I had to make a difficult decision. And he said, don't follow anyone else's definition of success. And that's where, it was eye-opening. I wish I had followed it sooner than I did, but it stayed with me. And I went back to it a few times in my life when making decisions.
What's the most important one thing that needs to change to make the world a happier place?
Accepting differences. You see, differences can evoke fear and hate, whereas I wish they evoked curiosity and interest in people. But yeah, we live in a very divided world, unfortunately.
Don't we just? Okay, final question. What is a simple, actionable first step we can take when it comes to having a healthier relationship with money that will help us on our mission to building a happier life?
I would say, ask yourself, what does money mean? Anytime you're saving, you're spending, ask yourself, what does it mean? I have an alternative answer.
You can give me two if you like. It's all good stuff.
You know how Martin Lewis, he has 3 questions that he invites people to ask themselves every time they're going to make a purchase. And his 3 questions are, do I need it? Can I afford it? And can I get it cheaper elsewhere? Which are really valuable questions. I would add to those, what am I buying really? What do I hope it will get me? And how else can I get that same feeling or emotion?
Yeah.
So I think it's about being mindful of what you're doing when you're spending. What emotion are you trying to address? And is money really going to address it? Or is there a different way
to fill that need or void? Vicky, thank you so much. This has been fascinating, much like your book, which I highly recommend. I actually got it on Audible. It's a book that I'm definitely going to re-listen to because there's just so much helpful advice in there. And I think so many people do bury their head in the sand, myself included. But then maybe if we pull our head from out of the sand, actually things aren't as bad as we think they are.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this topic to people's attentions. I do think that the more we talk about it, the less it'll be a taboo and the less shame people will have about money.
Thank you again to Vicky Reynal. If you want to follow Vicky on Instagram, she is at Vicky Reynal Psychotherapy. And her website is www.reynal, spelt Reynal, psychotherapist.co.uk. And we'll put that in the episode show notes. US listeners, Vicky's book, Money on Your Mind, the psychology behind your financial habits, will be available on January 7th. Pre-order it now through your favourite book retailers. And that concludes another episode of the Happier Life Project podcast with me, Gabby Sanderson. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I ask for just one more minute of your time, please, while I run through the important housekeeping. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, please do call your doctor or the emergency services immediately. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is me, and the interviewees. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. Our partners at the Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. If you're listening on one of the podcast platforms, please do subscribe and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. And to find and follow us on social media, we're most active on Instagram, and you can find us at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.